Chumash to hand. We won't go through so far. Have you got a Parshas Vayechi, Bereshis? If you haven't got it to hand, then don't worry. Have you got a Bereshis nearby? Bereshis chapter 50, Posuk Yud Zayin. Got Charles joining us.
Hi, how are you?
Hello, Baruch Hashem, yourself.
Good, thank you.
We can't quite see you.
Struggling with mikvaot.
Oh.
Yeah, I went in the deep end.
Oh, very good. But we've had tougher masechtas. But anyway, yeah, no, good for you. Keep going with that. Not in the last furlong, really. That's for the people doing the Mishnah Yomis, which Charles is. That's 2 Mishnahs a day. Good for Charles. He's been there from the beginning of this cycle. So Sammy is not quite with us yet, but anyway. Yes, Charles, if you can, I think everybody's trying to go on mute because we can't control that centrally. But by all means, any questions come off mute. Before we start, let's have a quick look at chapter 50, Posuk 17, if you've got that, in Bereshis, because we were speaking last week, if you remember. If you've got it, if not, I can quite happily mention it. I might have mentioned this before, but it is the opportunity to do this. Chapter 50, Posuk 17. Last week, we were on the bottom of Yud Zayin Omid Aleph. In fact, that's where we start still today, Yud Zayin Omid Aleph. And if you remember, we were talking about if someone's prepared to overlook something, then it will be overlooked for him too. So it's worthwhile trying to forgive someone. And treating them in that way, as we said, midah keneged midah. Let me just have a quick sip here. All right. Now look at that Posuk 50, chapter 50, Posuk Yud Zayin. This is the story where Yaakov has passed away, and the brothers come to Yosef to plead with him, not knowing what would happen now that Yaakov is no longer with them. Will Yosef please pardon them? Of course, he'd sold them, as we remember. They had sold him. Now look at the posuk. Kosomru Yosef. This was a messenger sent on behalf of the brothers. And this is what you should tell Yosef. Ono sono, please lift up Pesha achercha v'chatosom, the avera, the sin of your brothers, their transgression, kiro, what they've done. Exactly. Look at those words, ono sono. Look carefully at those 3 words, ono sono. And this is rare. To have a 3-worded palindrome. A palindrome covering 3 words. Have you got that? Ono sono. You can read that the other way as well. Ono sono. The idea of forgiving, and that will come back to you as well. So it's worth your while. I just mentioned that, most beautiful. I don't know the source of that. I saw that quoted. I'm not sure what the source is, but it's a wonderful, if you're into palindromes, which I am, and anyone's got some other wonderful palindromes, please let me know. So that's a nice one just to start. As we move on, we're at the bottom of Yud Zayin Omid Aleph. Right at the end, the last line, and we're looking at this posuk. And if you remember this posuk, you probably have it around the side of your Gemara as well. It's a posuk in Micha. You probably got it around the side of your Gemara. I have it in mind, and you probably have the own attachment if you're using attachment. Who is like you, Hashem, to the remnant of Nachalosoi, his Nachlo, his inheritance. What does this mean? We haven't focused much on this Lish'eris Nachaloso. We now will. Have a look at the very last line of the Gemara, Yud Zayin Omid Aleph. Lish'eris Nachaloso, Omer Rab Acha Bachanina. It's an aliyah v'kotzba. Anybody come up for a term which is used from time to time? An aliyah v'kotzba. What's an aliyah v'kotzba? Have a look at Rashi. The aliyah is actually the thick, fat tail of the animal, assuming the animal is a kosher animal, clearly. It's a juicy tail of the animal. But look at this. Shemena. Aliyah is the shemena. That's what it means. When it says aliyah, it's not just an aliyah, it's normally a fat, thick, full of shomein, yeshkan. However, the kotzba, there is a thorn in it. In other words, a bit of a sting in the tail, as you'd say. That's exactly where it is, the same word. A sting in the tail. And this is the Gemara using that lashon. I don't know where the English term comes from, but this is whether it actually comes from here, I don't know. So it's interesting. Somebody might want to follow that up sometime. Aliyah b'kotzba, which means a sting in the tail. Exactly that comment. Look at Rashi. Shmeina yeshkan. And aliyah shmeina. Remember, we've often learned this idea of Rashi. Although you start off with the word aliyah, Rashi continues and it flows into his Pirush as well. Hello, somebody said something? No? No? Aliyah shmeina yeshkan v'kotzba, with a thorn in it, that's a sting in the tail. Koloma. Dovo tanchumin yeshkan. There are words here of comfort for us. Avayesh b'soicha dovo kosher. With a little bit of a sting, something difficult. She'ena shover. I've got here lakoil. It's not suitable for everybody. So this pasuk which says Hashem forgives, L'she'eris nachaloso. What's this remnant of his nachalo? His inheritance clearly is referring to Klal Yisrael. But what does he mean by his remnant? L'she'eris. What is this word she'eris? Of course, we have Shema she'eris Yisrael. We find that mentioned as well, of course, in Tachnun. Shomei Yisrael, Shema she'eris Yisrael. What is this word? Remnant. Now, often it means Klal Yisrael sadly decimated over the years of exile. The Rebbeinu should look after the decimated she'eris Yisrael. But here, the Pasuk's talking about Klal Yisrael, Hashem forgiving them, but forgiving only Lish'eris Nachalosai. Have a look at the Gemara here. What's this kotes? Aliyah v'kotzba. Last few words. Lish'eris Nachalosai v'lo l'chol Nachalosai. To the remnant, the remainder of his inheritance, and not in totality. As we turn the page, those people using an actual Gemara, and of course, we're inside. If you look at the next Talmud, Yud Ches Aleph on the bottom, in sight of the next Mishnah, some way off, but nevertheless in sight. So, what does this mean? Top line of the Gemara, Yud Zayin on the base. Lemi shemesim atzmo kishirayim. Hashem will forgive, as we said there. No se oven but over al pesha. We've spoken about that. Have a look at the Rashi on top. Lemi shemesim atzmo kishirayim. Interesting. Rashi, according to our Girsa, doesn't seem to say anything more than we got in the Gemara. I've got round the side of my Gemara, you may not have that, a different text in Rashi. And it actually, there just should be the word Elah. It really is from the previous Rashi on the previous page. This is not a statement on its own. Clearly, the printer, seeing those words, Lamisha Mason, put them on top as we got it here. But it links up with the previous Rashi on the previous page. Very straightforward. And therefore, it's not really, as we say, a dibur on its own. It links to the previous Rashi very straightforwardly. I will have you turn the page again. It should say the word Elo Lamisha Mesim Matzma Kushirayim. That is the end, really, of the previous Rashi, rather than being on the top on its own here, because otherwise it's not really adding much at all, unless there was a concern about the text. So what is Rashi saying, or what is the Gemara saying? Hashem will forgive. And yes, if the person is sincere and feels kishirayim. What does it mean, kishirayim? Like leftovers. Leftovers, if you look at the Mefarshim here, it means someone who has this humility. They feel that, like, as I say, leftovers after a meal, they feel they're leftovers. They're coming, as we say, closing in on Rosh Hashanah, kedalim ucharoshim, coming, beseeching Hashem. If you're prepared to do that, remember we spoke about this principle about tachanunim, coming as a matnas chinam to Hashem, then Hashem will listen. A very important principle which keeps cropping up, davening, as we say, with his humility. So very nice, finishing off that pasuk. Continues the Gemara. Rav Huna Romi. What's Romi? Romi is like a remio, a question. In fact, it's more than just a question, it's a contradiction. So he's asking the remio. The pasuk says, we know this pasuk from Tehillim, from Ashrei, Tzadik Hashem b'chol dorochav, yes, full of tzidkus in his ways, v'chosid, and pious b'chol ma'asov. What does it mean v'chosid b'chol ma'asov? Tzadik sounds like tzedakah, or you could be tzedek tirdof, judgment, strict letter of the law, but then it sounds at the end of this pasuk says b'chosid b'chol ma'asov, with chesed, it sounds like rather different to the tzedek mentioned in the first part of that pasuk. So have a look here, second line down, Yud Zayin Omid base, Tzadik Hashem b'chol dorochav. Sam with the second line down, Tzadik Hashem b'chol dorochav v'chosid b'chol ma'asov. Bitchila, initially, Tzadik, ulavasoif chesed. So interesting. Have a look at Rashi, top line. Tzadik, so Rashi is explaining, or the Gemara is too, in the Lashon of tzedek, meaning strict, straight down the line, tzedek tiradov, righteous in as much as being correct. Have a look at Rashi, Tzadik b'mishpat emes, a mishpat of truth. But nevertheless, then moving on, we have this chosid, nichnas lefnim min hashura, Hashem going beyond the strict letter of the law. We have this principle constantly found in the Torah too, where we talk about Hashem Elokim, Yud Kei Vov Kei, and normally in Midas Hadin, and Elokim. Boreshis Boro Elokim is normally Midas Hadin, but nevertheless, coupled with that, lots of esoteric and lots of interesting principles mentioned about the Yud Kei Vov Kei together with the Elokim, mystical even. The Yud Kei Vov Kei represents Midas HaRachamim. We've got the same principle here, Tzadik Hashem b'chol dorochav, but nevertheless, Hashem goes v'chosid b'chol ma'asov. Nevertheless, we've found this principle before, tilting the balance. But it does depend, and we keep mentioning this, on something that we do ourselves. We can't just expect that. Why should there be this tilting of the balance unless we're prepared to go the extra mile ourselves in our prayer or showing the sincerity that we do mean it? So that's the principle there. Continue the Gemara. B'chosid, b'chol ma'aso, b'tchilat tzadik l'so chosid. Rabbi Loza Romi. Rabbi Loza's got another problem. Well, another posuk in Tehillim. The first one was Rav Huna. Now we've got Rabbi Loza, another one of the Amoraim. The posuk comes up in Tehillim Samach Beis, Again, you should have it around the side of your Gemara. L'cho Hashem chesed, to you Hashem is chesed. And then the pasuk finishes, Uchsiv, ki ato teshalem leish kamaaseu. Well, this is the point about the key. The key in Hebrew. Do you remember the word key? We've had that in various places. The word key can mean 4 different things. Remember, dilma elo doho. We have this principle elsewhere. We've had this, a couple of places. Dilma elo doho. We had this very early on in our Gemara. Dilma elo doho. Have a look at Daf. If you've got a Gemara in front of you, Daf Gimel. Have you got Daf Gimel? Right on the top, 6 lines down. Omerish Lokish, 6 lines down. Daf Gimel Omad Aleph. Omerish Lokish in the middle of that piece over there, but the principle comes out. Ki mishamish bedalad l'shenis. The word ki in Hebrew can be understood in 4 different ways. Dilma ela doho. Worth remembering if you're doing translating. If, Dilma perhaps, and Rashi, the long Rashi there goes back a month or 2. Ela but, not this key, this, or doho because. And Rashi gave loads of examples. If you're interested in following that up, there's Chazorah, there it is, Daf Gimel Omad Aleph, lots of wonderful Rashis there, explaining this Dilma Ela Doho. If we go back to our Gemara, gentlemen, we've got our Gemara which says, L'cho Hashem chesed, to you is kindness, but it goes on, Ki ato teshalem nishma. Now, if you translate because you pay people according to their actions, what's that L'cho Hashem chesed? Explains Rabbi Elazar. Bitchila, it's the other way around. Bitchila ki atot teshalem leish l'maaseu, because you start off leish k'maaseu, each person according to their own actions. Ulavasoif u'lecho Hashem chesed. So it's a different L'cho Hashem chesed comes on top of, because you've getting feedback. Somebody needs to got an iPhone. Bit of feedback from somebody. If you can go on, very good. Yeah, if you can come on mute. Yeah. So in other words, L'cho Hashem chesed comes on top of kiyato. You Hashem will, because you Hashem will pay according to someone's activities. Which person can say they can stand up to that? And therefore Hashem kindly comes through if there is that sincerity. L'cho Hashem chesed. So I think there the key could be understood as a because. L'cho Hashem chesed, because you would like to follow through. Elokim midas hadin, as we say, seen here, this idea, the acting according to the strict letter of the law, but who can stand up to that type of investigation? And therefore, as part and parcel of Hashem's midas, we have a L'cho Hashem chesed, because otherwise it will be very difficult to actually continue on. Beautiful idea. Continues the Gemara. Ilfa, or Ilfi. Ilfi, nothing to do with Alfie. This is Ilfi. Va'omri lo ilfo. Was very particular to know exactly who it was who said what, because we often want to make sure there's, number one, often you might paskin like one person, not another. You want to see consistency of that view throughout. So we're very concerned who it is. So here there was actually a discussion exactly who it was. Was it Ilfi or Ilfo? 2 different Amoraim. Again, we've got the same type of contradiction. This time we go to the Psukim of Kisisa, and this will lead on to something else on the same topic. Here, we're going into the Yud Gimel Midas. Remember the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim? After the Egel Azov, where Moshe is appealing to Hashem, we have remember the famous words, Hashem, Hashem, Kerachim, Chanun. I think you've got that around the side of your Gemara. You've got Rav Chesed ve'emes. So let's just have a quick look at this in the Gemara, and then we'll follow this through. V'rav chesed, it says Hashem is full of chesed. Remember, we've used these words before when we were talking about Beis Hillel. Do you remember Beis Hillel with all these the scales that were taking place? When we're talking about various dinim for Tchias HaMesim, we spoke about these scales and tipping of the scales. V'rav chesed, an abundance of chesed, but more than that, it says a be'emes, but it's with truth. Well, do they go together? Or chesed u'ksiv be'emes? So you could understand it, yes. V'rav chesed, tilting V'rav chesed when it comes to maybe Averis, but nevertheless emes, truth. Things are not forgotten. Good activities are never forgotten, even for a shoim. But the Gemara, according to the words of Ilfa, learns is different. Look at this. B'tchila be'emes. Yes, starting off with emes, ulevasoif Rav chesed, to Rav chesed coming over the emes. So Rav chesed, if you like, countering the MS underneath, maybe there should really be the strict letter of the law according to the truth. Nevertheless, Hashem, V'rav chesed, moving and tilting the balance. So again, the same principle, we've now found this in 3 different psukim. So that's a very powerful lesson that we're learning there. The Gemara, as you often find, as we mentioned, a pasuk, goes back into those psukim. We are now back into the Yud Gimel Midas, one thing leading to another, as you do often find in the Gemara. Look at this. Vayavo, that pasuk begins, Vayavo Hashem al ponov, Vayikra Hashem ke'racham echamnu echapayim v'chesed v'emes. So now, going back to the beginning of that pasuk, the Gemara says the following: Vayavo Hashem al ponov. What does it mean? Hashem passed. Vayavo Hashem al ponov, over his. Who are we talking about there? Moshe Rabbeinu. Let's just understand this a little bit. Vayikra, and he called Vayavo Hashem al ponov. The strict translation would be Hashem passed al ponov in front of Moshe Rabbeinu. This was the glimpse, if you like, that Hashem was showing to Moshe Rabbeinu about his midas. Why Vayikra, and he called Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Ilmole mikra kosov. Had there not been a posuk, ilmole with an aleph at the end, had there not been a posuk, a mikra kosov, the posuk which actually states this very clearly, you would never have said something like this. What would you have said? But that Hashem passed in front of him. These are like words which are, how can you actually attribute this to Hashem? Says the Gemara, no, it's teaching us something very special. Melamed, it teaches us, Shenis Atef HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, what does this mean? Hashem enwrapped himself, K'shliach Tzibor, like a Baal Tefillah, a Shliach Tzibor, V'hera lo'ila Moshe, showing Moshe, Seder Tefillah, the order of davening. Wow. What do you mean Hashem enwrapped himself like a Shliach Tzibor? Have a look at the side of your Gemaras. You've got Rabbeinu Hananel, another one of the great Rishonim. Now, I've got it in mind. I don't know what Gemara you're using. On the side of Rabbeinu, have you got Rabbeinu Hananel on the side of your Gemara? I hope you have. Follow it down somewhere. It depends on which print you're using. Might be using the attachment. Again, I think it's around the side there. It says, Melamed shenis atef HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, in mine, it's quite a few lines down. In yours, it may be slight. I've got 2 Gemaras here, actually. So let me just find this one for you. In this edition, in the earlier Gemaras, it's the 3rd wide line of Rabbeinu Hananel, the older Gemaras. In the newer Gemaras, and I think on the attachment, it's much higher up in Rabbeinu Hananel. I don't know if people have got it. Have you got the third wide line if you're using an older Gemara? Otherwise, it's higher up. Melamed, have you got it? Melamed Shinisatev HaKadosh Baruch Hu?
A new one. On the attachment, it's the fifth line down.
Thank you. Of using attachment, I think that's more an earlier one. I've got my mind's is further down, and I'll say the older edition is the third wide line. I just want to point this Pirish of Rabbeinu Hanan, Pirish. What do you mean HaKadosh Baruch Hu enwrapped himself? Tziva lamaloch. This is what when Hashem enwrapped himself. It meant he commanded a malach lisatev k'shliach tzibur hayored lifnei ateva, as if going down. Notice this lashon, going down in front of the box. The box here being the Aron HaKodesh. V'her ohu leMoshe, showing Moshe how to pray, how to daven. This enwrapping idea. So when it says Hashem enwrapped himself, it means there was this vision that Moshe Rabbeinu had of this malach enwrapping himself. Very interesting point. This enwrapping, a shliach tzibur, the whole point about this enwrapping, enveloping, which means full of kavanah. The whole idea of this enwrapping means there's nothing else. It's just you're on your own. Continue Rashi here. Sorry, I'm now going back to the Gemara.
Can I just ask Norman something?
Yes.
I mean,
please.
I thought the Midrash actually says that not a malach, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself was. Moshe went up and found him in tefillin and talis.
You're right. That's actually what we've got in our Gemara.
When he says he says a malach, it says a malach, not.
Yeah, absolutely. Rabbeinu Chanalid is explaining our Gemara that when our Gemara says Nisatef HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it means a malach, and then presumably Rabbeinu Chanalid will do that in the same with those Gemaras you're mentioning. In other words, wherever it's mentioned Hashem enwrapping himself, it means there's this vision of a malach, as we've seen here in Rabbeinu Chananel. Yeah, no, you're right. Otherwise, it's very difficult to comprehend what we're talking about, Hashem enwrapping himself in talis and tefillin. But I say without Rabbeinu Hananel, it makes it that much easier. In other words, there was this vision of a malach, Hashem commanding a malach to enwrap himself. That's how Rabbeinu Hananel is learning pshat in our Gemara, rather than taking it at say straight face value. Continue the Gemara. The Heralola Moshe Seder Tefillah. He showed him the order of davening. What does that mean? Omaloi, Kol Zaman She Yisrael Chotin. Whenever Yisrael sadly are sinned, Yasu Lefonai Keseder Hazer. That's also fascinating. What's this Yasu? You would have said Yispalalu. Yasu, they should do the Fonai Keseder Hazer. Va'ani moichalem. And what is this Seder? The Seder is Vayikra Hashem Hashem Kei Racham Achanu the Yud Gimel Midas Rachamim. So what's the Gemara telling us here? What's its lashon anyway of do Yasu Lefonai Keseder Hazer? So I've seen lots of interpretations. Actually, Roberts, he should be well. Often explained, and I've seen that him saying the same. This idea of Yasu, yes, we are appealing to Hashem's Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. That's the key. We've got some feedback from someone. Okay. Sorry, Charles. I think we've got some feedback there. Probably best to go on mute if you can, and then we come off mute. Yes, this Yasu means you've got two ideas going on here. Enwrapping yourself full of kavana, but Yasu Lefonai Keseder Hazer means, of course, we are human. But we should try, as we always have this idea, Zeh Keli V'Anveu, to follow the midas of Hashem. We should also take upon ourselves to try and act. If we're looking for forgiveness, and very much linked up to the previous Gemara, we should take upon ourselves acts of chesed, That's why Yasu lefonai kasei hazeh, and then we can look to Hashem and plead to Hashem to do the same to us. So it fits in very nicely with the earlier Gemara. So Yasu lefonai doesn't mean just, you say the words and that's it. Say the words clearly, but take them on ourselves, that we should also try to act in that way. Rav Chesed, Rachum, Chanun, Erech HaPayim, all those activities, try and Yasu lefonai kaseda hazeh. That's beautiful. That Yasu lefonai Yisrael, they should do in front of me like this order of the midas I have. And we often find this idea of the Hashem with his, when we talk about Bikucholim, Alavois HaMeis, Hachnosas Kala, we find this with Hashem and we've got to follow suit. Then, Ba'ani Moichel Lohem, I will forgive them. Beautiful idea of this enwrapping in this talus, showing total, this concentration, rather than being, and it means wrapped in talus, presumably without a mobile, without the mobile on at least. In other words, total concentration. On top of that, not just concentration ben odom lamokim, but also ben odom lachaveiro. Ya'asu, people we should all take on if we can to behave in this way. And having mentioned this post, we're going like from one link to another. The Gemara goes on.
Can I, Norman? Can I just say, I'm using the Steinsaltz.
Yes.
And he doesn't have, in Rabbeinu Chananel, it's got a slightly different text. He doesn't have that word Yasu at all.
Sorry, has he got Rabbeinu Chananel?
Chananel.
Right. No. This Yasu is not the normal translation. Yasu normally means you should do and say the Yud Gimel Midas.
Yeah, he doesn't translate Rabbeinu Chananel. It's just got the normal Surah Sadaf.
All right.
I'm just saying that the text of Rabbeinu Chananel is different. There was a few words different, but in particular, it doesn't say. Just says, "Kolzman Yisrael chotim lefonai, asay lefonai kaseda hazeh."
Yes, you're quite right.
Yeah.
No. But have a look in your Rabbeinu Chananel earlier on. That's where we picked it up. Melame shini sativ hakodesh baruch hu. He must have that. Pirish.
He has that. Shini sativ hakodesh baruch hu. Pirish. Tzivo lemaloch lehis atef geshnech tzivo hayored lefnei hatevo. The hirohu lemoshe.
Yes.
V'omalo kol zman sheyisrael chotim lefonai asay lefonai kaseda hazeh.
Absolutely, no, absolutely right. Yeah, it's in the same. What we focused on Rabbeinu Chananel for that earlier part, where it was a malach rather than Hashem, hard for us to grasp. But you're absolutely right. The second part, and the normal way you'd understand this would be Yasu, do, which means behave and not behave. It's really say these words. It's this loshon of Hashem. It's only that there are other interpretations who will say, why doesn't it say you should say these words? What's Yasu? You should do since when do you do? But you're right. You could say act in the following way and say this. You could, but I say this. So this other pshat we're suggesting also would be Yasu, do, follow me, follow the action. But I take your point absolutely. Yes.
No, we say that marachum, atorachum, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes.
So, I mean, that's it's not a new idea, that.
No. But what we're saying is, in all these different aspects, as we say, erech hapayim, rav chesed, noitze chesed lo alofim, noitze, forgiving. You're right, absolutely right. Ma rachum, atorachum. We do find that. But here we're saying in every one of these midas, whether it's Pesha, when we spoke about this last week, following 13, through.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. So it's not a new concept, but we're just saying that this time it's with the full 13 midas harachim, every one of them we should follow. Or, as you say, as Benji's just mentioned there, it's actually saying these words and appealing to Hashem, hopefully to act with us with these attributes of Chesed, Hashem. Now, at this point, there is a Tosfos, second Tosfos, Have a look at the second Tosfos, and next to it, there's at rare Hagor, which means an addition to the Tosfos. All it says at the base of this Hagor is Kach Pirish Harav Zal. But it doesn't say which Rav Zal. Have you got it? The second Tosfos? And if you've got the Posuk, Vayavo Hashem al Pono Vayikra, so Hashem passes, the Malach or Hashem, passing in front of Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayikra, and who's Vayikra here? Hashem sounds like he is calling and saying, these are the midas that you should utilize as well. And then we've got Hashem, Keirach V'Chanun. Of course, we say that Slichas time. We say it on Yom Tov when we take out the Sefer Torah. Hashem, the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. Okay, Nusach Sfar, they say that every day in their Tachanun. What's this Hashem? Now, if you look in the actual Chumash, there's a psik, a vertical line after that first Hashem. Not that rare actually, because you generally find, we've had this mentioned with this before, after the name of Hashem, there should be somewhat of a stop. And if with the Naginas, those people are into Naginas, if the actual Naginas are not stopping Naginas, they're called the Meshores rather than a mafsik, then you will find after the name of Hashem, a pasik, there should be just a little bit of a stop after mentioning Hashem's name. And here, those people know the Naginas, Hashem, it's a munach and then a zokef koton. After a munach, after the first Hashem, that's normally a linking note. It may link, but there's a pasik there to make some little stop. After the next Hashem, it's a zokef koton, the note, which itself is a mafsik, is a stop, so that's no problem. But that psik's going to be quite important. Look at the Tosfos, please. Shalosh Esrei Midos. Omer Rabbeinu Tam. The Shnei Shemos Horishonim Heim Shnei Midos. There are two midos, Hashem and Hashem. What does it mean? It's the same word. Could the Omrinon Hocha? The Gemara here will mention later on. We haven't seen that. Ani Hashem Kodim Sheyecheto, the Rachem Olav. I am merciful before the person has sinned. I'm merciful. Vani Marachim L'Acha Sheyecheto Im Yoshuv. That's very powerful. If the person does teshuvah, often in the human experience, someone has sadly done something negative to someone else, even if the person says, I forgive you, a little bit of a bitter taste is left. Very hard, of course one should totally forgive if one can, but normally it's very hard to remove that in totality. What we're saying for Hashem is, Hashem, yes, if a person is prepared and is doing, and as we said before, sincere in his teshuvah, Hashem, it's the same Hashem, very powerful message here, before and afterwards. Well, so Hashem is full of Rachmanos, Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's before an Avera, before anything. In other words, the person is a tzaddik l'mashal. After an Avera, if there is teshuvah, it's still that same Yud Kei Vav Kei. Hashem will act and behave to that individual as if the Avera has never happened. In other words, it's like the slate is totally cleansed. And that's why you've got this word Hashem, Hashem twice. One before an Avera, obviously there is that feeling. You can imagine it with humans as well. A person hasn't done anything wrong to this person, so there's a nice connection between the two of them. Subsequently, if something negative has happened and he's forgiven, it's very hard to come back to that same position. Yeah, but nevertheless, with Hashem, that's what it is, and certainly following what we said before, if a person can try in some ways to follow that, That would be ideal. So yes, they are two midas. Now, next to the next word, I've got Hashem again, but I do have a text which says this should really be the next word, Kael, because it's Hashem, Hashem, Kael, Rachel, Machanun. So Rashi said, back to Tosfos, this next word is also midas Rachamim. Kael, velo Kelokim. Interesting. The word Kael seems to be part of the word Elokim. So my text, rather than the word Hashem on that line, changes it to Kael. So we're now looking at the third of the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. This word Kael, don't think it's part of Elokim, which means normally Midas Hadin. This is not. Normally we do find this word when it talks about Hashem. Yes, there's power behind it, but it's not Midas Hadin. And we'll see more about that in a moment. So that's what Tosfos is telling us, the word Kael. We find this word Kael, which we'll find in this Hagor, this an addition in a moment, where it talks about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ulavakesh, when it's talking about food and sustenance, we find Ulavakesh me Kael Ochlam. Hashem, yes, Kael may be powerful, but it's not Midas Hadin, it's still that justice. It fits very nicely in the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. Continues Tosfos. A few other points he wants to mention. Ovoin and Pesha v'Chator. Those three things coming up, plus V'Nake. Right at the end, right at the very end, we've got no say Ovoin, Hashem lifts up, forgives, Ovoin, Pesha, Chator, V'Nake, and then cleanses. What's the difference between all of that? Says Tosfos. Hey, Nimnim Badalad. They're counted as four. Kid Isa B'Yuma, as you find in the Gemara in Yuma, but Perek Shnei Seirim tells us where to look for that. In Daf Lamed Vov. Actually, around the side, I've got it should be, it's a different Perek actually. The right Daf, but the wrong Perek. Unless that Perek was longer for Tosfos, I can't tell you. But anyway, it is in Yuma Daf Lamed Vov. What's the difference between those three words? Avonos, Peshoim, Chatoim. Says Tosfos, Avonos elu zedonos. Things done with full knowledge, bemazed, full intention, intentional averis. Peshoim, elu merodim. What's merodim? Mered, rebellious. Rebellious means an avera done, not just intentional, but davka doing this avera. But davka, it's a rebellious way of acting stronger still. V'chatois elu hashkogos. Things which are done accidentally also need forgiveness. Even avera done accidentally, hard for us to grasp these concepts. But for example, the effect it must have had on the individual, on the neshama, we can on that perhaps an easiest way, certainly on the medical side. Imagine eating something which is not good for the individual. Poison, not good for the individual. Medications which are not good for the individual, and the person will say, as often happens, could happen with kids, sadly, it was an accident. I didn't know. I thought they were just aspirins. I took the wrong medication. Yeah, it was an accident, but it's causing damage. Similarly here, even accidents which are done on the Avera side have an effect on the neshama, and therefore they also need a kapara. But those are the three that we're talking about there. And that's the end of what Rabbeinu Tam wanted to explain within those Yud Gimel Midas. However, continues Tosfos. Going back earlier, Ubi Megillah Storim, Seisa, it sounds like a hidden Megillah, or maybe of hidden things, of Rabbeinu Nissim. And here Rabbeinu Nissim, the Goin, going back earlier still, And he says the following. Although Rabbeinu Tam says Hashem, Hashem are two different midos, says Rabbeinu Nissim, no, they're not. Ein, Moine, Shem, Horishn. You can't count the first one. Sheyesh psik. Now he's making a big play on this psik that you'll find in the Chumash that comes after Hashem, Hashem. You'll notice that if you look in the Chumash on that posuk in Shemos Lamed Daled, you'll find there actually is that psik. We mentioned it before. The Rabbeinu Nissim Goin is saying that psik is very important. It's there not just to make a stop in your laning, it's almost like a colon dash. Vayavu Hashem Apona Vayikra, he's calling out his names here, and he's saying Hashem, Yud Ke Vav Ke, psik, colon dash. These are the 13 attributes which you need to say, you need to behave, act accordingly. I'm getting feedback from someone on, yep. Thank you. Okay, back to our Rabbeinu Nissim. So because, have you got it in the Tosfos? Sheyesh psik bein hashemus. Why is that psik there? Mishum dohochi ka'omakro. This is how you understand the pasuk. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sheshamai Hashem, whose name is Hashem. That's the essence we always talk about. The Yud Ke Vav Ke. Actually, Korah called and says out. That's the main name, if you like, Yud Ke Vav Ke. But within that, you've got 13 midas. So when you've got Hashem, Hashem, it's not Hashem, Hashem before and after. That may well be true, but that you do not count them in your 13. That first one is Vayavu Hashem al pono vayikra Hashem. So it's Hashem. Very interesting. He is translating the pasuk, although it seems to be against the Neginus. He's translating Vayavu Hashem al pono vayikra Hashem, mentioning his names, Hashem, Kein, Rachum, Machanu. That's exactly what Tosfos is saying here. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Sheshma Hashem, Korah Hashem. Very interesting. The Rosh, I don't know if people got the Rosh, but the Rosh at the back does not like this. I've got the Rosh, other people may have it. I'll read out the Rosh so you don't have to search. He gives, he doesn't like it at all. And he says why he doesn't like it. And he says, Einamun Hashem. Hold on a minute. Oh. Yes. How he says the Rosh, he's basing it on the minhag of shuls on how we daven. He is going with Rabbeinu Tam, the Rosh, that they are two separate words, two separate midas. Hashem before, the love that Hashem has towards us before any averos are done. That's Hashem. And then Hashem afterwards, if a person is sincere in their in requesting forgiveness, then Hashem will have that same close connection. But the Rosh is going with that, and he says why. How does the Chazan, interesting, he's comparing there, he says, in B'chol Golus Yisrael, look anywhere and find any Chazan you like. She'achazan oimer, vayavor Hashem al pono vayikro. And then everybody shouts out, and of course we've got it exactly like that. When we take the Sefer Torah out, we say Hashem, Hashem, Keirach. Some people sing Hashem, Hashem, Keirach. He says that's the minhag, says the Rosh, in all shuls throughout Golus, very strong. And our call, he says that the community starts and says Hashem, Hashem, Keirach, Mechanun, whether it's Slichus, whether other occasions, or Ledivrei Hagon, according to the words of this Rav Nissim Gaon, the Chazan should say, Vayav Hashem apono vayikra Hashem, and then the community should come forward and say Hashem Kein Rachum. So he's interesting. He's bringing a proof from the actual minhag in all shuls that we say Hashem Kein Rachum Chanum. So yes, there is that psik there, and as we explained before, often you find this psik just to make a bit of a stop after the name of Hashem, but he's not making this into the same as we saw in Rabbeinu Nissim, who says that psik is like a colon dash. Fascinating point. Continues.
Can I just ask? That
Yes.
is really fascinating because it implies that we've got a tradition going back. I guess is this what's called a Missinai tune?
Yeah.
The way that we daven this particular pasuk, because it's overriding the Naginas, particularly because the last word v'nakeh is in the next pasuk. We go past the Sof pasuk, don't we?
Well, hold on a minute. The Naginas actually does follow Rabbeinu Tam because it's Hashem, Munach, okay,
Yeah.
so that does follow rather than Rabbeinu Nissim. Your point about the Nakeh is a pashto. It's not the end of the pasuk.
But v'nakeh should go with the next word with the low. We break this pasuk up different. In the davening, we have a
yes and
different
no.
tradition to
It's saying two things. And I think there'll be more about that as well, but not today. V'nakeh means I'm cleansing. V'lo yenakeh, not always cleansing, depending if there is full slicha, full teshuva, that's the point. But I'll say Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, that is the last one of the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, you see. Hashem is prepared to totally cleanse the individual. V'lo yenakeh means, but if you're not prepared yourself, you're not looking for this full kapora, you won't get it. So v'nakeh lo yenakeh is v'nakeh with a pashto, a bit of a pause. Lo yenakeh, you're quite right, is a larger pause, but there is a gap between the two. So v'nakeh does actually conclude that, according to this cheshbon, that does conclude, and then lo yenakeh is like, I wouldn't say a sting in the tail, a little bit like that we mentioned before, which is only if there is full teshuvah. If not, that this will not happen. So that's what we're saying here. So if we go back to the end of this Tosfos, then the Tosfos finishes and says, "V'notzeh chesed lo alofim," guarding chesed lo alofim means for 2,000 generations, which means it's really, as we'll see in a minute, moine b'shtei midas. Notzeh chesed lo alofim is counted as two in the counting process. The notzeh chesed hainu mida achas, keeping that chesed and paying it back to future generations. But how many generations? Lo alofim, 2,000. Now, what's his 2,000 generations? It's only because we find the idea, poked of an ovis, abonim shleishim raribeim. Normally, on the negative side, it's 4 generations if people continue in the same negative path. But on the positive side, it's 500 times more. I mean, just to get it, it's getting across this idea of so much more. The chesed is so much more. And what does it mean, the chesed? The chesed, guarding a good action that's done. A good action is done. It's not just done for that individual. It's done and it's paid off. You know, the interest plus the capital is being paid off, not just for that generation, for future generations too. So notzeh chesed lo alofim is counted as 2. Notzeh chesed, number 1, keeping that chesed for future generations, but not just 1 or 2, not just 3 or 4, like the case of Aveirus, if people continue negatively. If people continue positively, then the effect of the mitzvah could be, as I say, it's 2,000 divided by 4. If you compare one with the other, 500 times as much. So in other words, just getting across the idea of the notzeh chesed is so much more, therefore counted as 2. Keep going in the Tosfos. So midah shemida tova meruba chomesh meos, 500 times as much. It's just, I'm not sure about the number 500, but giving across the idea of why it should be 500, I can't tell you, but it's getting across the idea that it's so much more on the positive side. In other words, a good action that's done will see future generations, many generations reaping the benefit. And we say that today, as we say, Likdoshim Asher ba'oretz heima. Remember in Pasuk in Tehillim, which says it's not in our zechus. Often we talk about zechus avos, what the parents went through, what the grandparents went through. Particularly if you talk about people going al Kiddush Hashem, dying al Kiddush Hashem just because they were Jews, the effect of that is huge. Not that we're wishing it on anybody to have to suffer in that way, but nevertheless, the effects of that are huge, and that's what we're saying here in this Tosfos. So it's midatov chamesh me'as hamidus peronis, the hosum ksiv al rebeim. If people continue in the negative way, then it will continue on. The onshin, the punishments continue on. But the idea mentioned 4 compared to here 2,000. So you see so much more of a hocha kasiv la'alofim. Now, there's not much time to go through this Hagor, but let's just have a look. The first part, the Hagor starts off with the idea that we said Hashem were 2 different midas. And he brings, I've got to mention this because this week's Haftorah. And remember, we've mentioned this before, although I spoke to somebody today, it was a big boki on Chassam Sofer. It's well known, the Chassam Sofer used to say it's a wonderful simon. If you punkt, as we say, inverted commas, you're learning something, and this week's Sedra Haftorah comes up, it's always a nice sign, so we'll take that with us. Apparently, Chassam Sofer was meant to have said, it's a very powerful omen if that happens. Although I can't find the source, this person couldn't find the source, but that's what they say in the name of the Chassam Sofer. Let's hope. We'll take it anyway. But here we have it. Look at this. It's like a medrash. It's called the Psikta Rabosi. Now, it starts off negatively, but ends up being a lot of nechama, all these haftarahs, the Shiva de Nechemta that we've started last week with Shabbos Nachamu, all Shiva de Nechemta, starting off saying, Tzion said, Azovani Hashem, Hashem has forsaken me, Hashem Shecheichoni has forgotten me. So interesting, you got the word Hashem twice there. Hashem. So the Pesikta says, Oison shtei midos azovuni. Those 2 midas have forsaken me and forgotten me. But of course, subsequently, there is an achoma in that. But what the point that the Hagor, this in addition to Tosfos, is mentioning is we find this concept of these 2 names of Hashem. When we so he's starting off saying we've got the same idea mentioned of these 2. The only question on it needs to be understood is if you look at Haftarah, when you get a chance, you'll find that the first one is Yud Kei Vav Kei, the second one is Aleph Daled Nun Yud. And that's not what we're talking about here. Now, everybody would understand Aleph Daled Nun Yud is different to Yud Kei Vav Kei. But in our example, we're looking at Hashem Kei Rachel V'Chana. They are actually the same word Yud Kei Vav Kei twice. So it's interesting that Agor says the Pesikta counts them as 2. Yeah, that's fine. The Pesikta counting it as 2, but don't bring that here. Why does Agor say V'Hochi Isa? V'Hochi Isa doesn't help us in our example. Maybe somebody's got a suggestion on that. I'm not sure I know why the Hagor is bringing that as a source of the idea of Hashem. Hashem can both be 2 different midas. I don't know. But that's very interesting. I will tell you this, and I close with this. There are lots of ways to formulate these Yud Gimel midas. One of them goes up even, if you like, is Sefer Hasidim, Rabbi Yehuda HaChossid. he mentions it goes up to he's counting right across, and that's of course why in the Piyut, remember we say which is only at like 2 psukim later, you find those words as well. So there's lots of ways of compiling the 13, what actually are the 13. Now, we've mentioned this point before, but I've mentioned this again. Within that those few psukim of the Yud Gimel Midas, we do find the words Poiked Ovein Oves Al Bonim Al Bnei Bonim Al Shileshim Al Ribeim. Now, it looks like that's something quite negative. Hashem paying, if people continue on in the same way, then Poiked Ovein Oves Al Bonim Al Shilesh. What is that doing in Midas, in the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim? What is that doing in this parsha at all? We find those same words used with the Meraglim. We've mentioned this point before, but I will mention it again because it's relevant here. And I don't know, what is the word Poiked Oven Ovas doing in Yud Gimel Midas and Harachamim? I can understand it in the Aseres Adibros, but not when we're coming to Hashem is showing us how he can be appeased by mentioning these words. Why mention Poiked Oven Ovas? It's true, it won't be counted in the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, but why they mention it at all? And if you remember, we brought the beautiful Ksava Kabbalah. If you remember, the word Poiked means to count, but as we often find in Hebrew, the word can mean itself and the opposite of itself. Lots of examples, Sokel, lots of examples which mean it and the opposite. Now, I don't know if people remember, the idea is Poiked can be, remember the Pasuk, when they went to fight against Midian, it says, Lo nifkad mimenu ish, which means nobody is missing, which means they're in the count. Lo nifkad, nobody in the count is not counted, if you see what I mean. Yeah, in other words, nobody's missing. So the Ksava Kabbalah says the same idea here. It's missing, removing. And when we say Poiked Oven Ovis, when we're talking about the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, a beautiful idea. Poiked Oven Ovis, it's not one of the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, but it's still full of Rachmanos, because what does it mean? Says the Ksava Kabbalah, Hashem removes the Averas of an individual through the children, the grandchildren, the fourth generation. So it's very positive looking at this here. In the Aseret Adibros, maybe that is a tough one, but not here. Here we're talking about Poiked Oven Ovis means Hashem remembering and removing our virus of an individual. So just like we talk about Schus Ovis, which of course we're all reaping the benefit of the Schus Ovis, we have a responsibility, payback time if you like, going back to the previous generations. And we spoke about this idea before. Remember the din that does happen to those previous generations, whether it's before Tchias HaMesim or the various olamas that we spoke about. So we have this responsibility. In other words, the ripple effect, the way we behave positively, hopefully, can have an effect on those earlier generations going back, and can, as we see, allow them a further rise, not a financial rise, but a spiritual rise in Olam Emes, looking down and seeing that those generations are behaving in the correct, wonderful way. It can have an effect, and that's the Poiked. It can remove the Averis themselves if the future generations are behaving in that way. Then therefore, just conclude with that point, that yes, Schus Ovis is wonderful. And of course, we're all, as I say, utilizing that, but we also have the responsibility as part of this piece of the Yud Gimel Midas to pay back if we can, and our actions can affect those neshamas in Olam Emes, as we say, and it's a great responsibility that we all have. With that, gentlemen, I will leave you for tonight.
Norman,
yes.
quick question.
Yes, please.
You mentioned about this week's Sidra.
Yes.
We got that here on the Talmud. Enei Hashem Elokecha ba.
Yes, coming up. Very good. Yes. Sadly, we didn't actually, well, you've mentioned it now. Thank you very much. We didn't actually have it in the Shiur, but yes, you're quite right. If you'd have it in the normal Shiur, that would have been better still. But yeah, no, worth having, absolutely.
Yeah.
Bear in mind, you're quite right, that this week's Sedra, this week's Haftarah. Yes. So I say bid you farewell from Ramat Beit Shemesh. That's where I am. I don't know if you, Benji, you know that's where we are.